Hey guys, this is Abba with CoffeeNCode. Welcome to the official introduction to C# tutorial for beginners. We'll be starting with Visual Studio 2019. If you haven't already watched the last video about how to install this IDE, please click on the banner at the top, finish the installation and come back to this video. Okay, let's get started. So, click this button that says create a new project. I want to be making a C# project using the Windows platform in the console, and we'll be using the .NET framework, so click on this, press next, then we will rename our project, called data types, select our location, press create, and give it a minute while Visual Studio IDE loads up. So here's the intro point to our program. So we have a namespace, a class, and a main. This main function is where our code will start to run once we press the start button. So we can press it now, and we can see that the console pops up and closes because there's no code. So in order to stop the console from closing immediately, we can add a read line and press F5 as a shortcut to the start button, and the console will hang here until you press enter. Once you press enter, it'll finish executing this line and it'll move on and the program will finish. Okay, so let's get started with our most basic data type, and that'll be an integer. So to declare a variable, what we're going to have to do is first write the type that we want, followed by the name that we want, and then we can end that with a semicolon. So the type that we want is an integer, but the structure that C# processes it in is called an int, and we can give it a name which we will call sample int, and we can end that with a semicolon to indicate the end of the line. Okay, now we have two options to assign the integer with the value. We could say sample int equals 5, which will give us access to storing 5 in the sample int. So these two lines are now become declaring the variable and initializing the variable. But if you wanted to, you could declare and initialize both in one line, and we could leave it like this. So it says here, the green underline, that the variable is assigned but is never used, so you can ignore that for the time being because we'll be using it in a second. So this is how all variables are being declared. It doesn't matter what type you use or what name, it just needs to be in the specific order. So we can write CW and press tab twice, and it gives us the console.writeline as a shortcut, and we can type sample int. Now you notice that the green line has gone because we've used it. So now if we press F5 or press the start button, we can see that we get the variable being printed. Perfect. So just to note that this integer variable is a 32-bit signed integer, as it says there. So that means the maximum value for an integer is 2.1 billion and the minimum value is negative 2.1 billion. So if we process the max value and store it inside the sample int and press F5 again, we can see that we've got the value here. So, and we can use the min value as well, just to show you that. There we go. So you can see it's a pretty big range from negative this value to positive this value. But let's say in your program, if you wanted a bigger number, we can declare a long. So when you hover over the long word, it says there that it's a 64-bit signed integer, which means that this is double the size of an integer, but it's double the memory size, which increases the amount of numbers that you can store exponentially. So if we do long.max value, you can see that the number displayed here is very big. And now if we do minimum value, we can see that the number is also very big, but it's negative, so it covers a bigger range. Now if we just compare the lengths in the console, you'll see that it's considerably bigger. So if we just use the CW shortcut again, or you could write console.writeline, and we can type sample long in the brackets and press F5, and you can see that this number is exponentially huger. Once you do use a long, it's going to use up a lot more memory than it is for an integer, so don't always use a long and assume that you're going to use all of the values, because the chances are you're not going to. So always stick with integer unless you really know that you're going to need a long. So now that we've covered whole numbers, we can cover doubles. So we can say 5.5 semicolon, and we can print that line. So we can say 5.5, and the same thing with the other two variables. They have max and min, so you can see their values are really big here. So this just means it's 1.79, all of these numbers, and e is times by to the power of 10. So you've got 1 followed by like 300 zeros, which is a really big number. And the same thing for minimum value, just the negative of the value we just said, which is great because that's a lot of numbers to work with. Moving on, so we have our Boolean, which just means to give us a yes or no answer. These are used quite often in your programs to control flow. We'll get onto that later on, but here we're just saying we're given a variable the value of true, and once we run that we can just see the true value, and the only other value you can give it is false, so we can change that to false and run it again, and we can see it says false now. So moving on, so now we've covered whole numbers, decimal numbers, true or false values. We also now have to cover characters. So we have a char, and we can store the letter A in it. And because it is a char, it only lets us type one char, because char just means character. So if we run that, we can see there's A. And if we try to type anything more in here, then we get an error saying that there's too many characters because a char will only fit one. Now, if you need to store more than one character in your program, then we use something called strings. And a string is just a list of loads of little characters inside. We have one character here, another character, another character. So this exact string that I've wrote here is 3 characters put together into one string. So we can use CW again, and we can print out the string, and we can see the output in the console. So we can start to use these data types to construct our programs, our if statements, etc, which we'll cover in the next lessons. So that wraps it up for our basic data types. I'll finish this now. Let me know if I've missed anything in the comments below, and I'll expand on it in a further video. For the next video, we'll be covering the console write line and the console read line more in depth, and using variables as well with them, so he can show you how to print them and how to actually make use of read line to store characters from the console. Thank you for watching, subscribe and like.